took what I want, but you find that everything they've got, you step forwards to my shadow, you are follow in my pattern.
Hello and welcome to the Ladies' Room. Today it is my great pleasure to have with me a wonderful local celebrity, Steve Miller, who is a very prolific artist, author, photographer, sculptor, has a clothing line, you name it, he's doing it. He's everywhere. He's had over 50 solo shows, he's in museums, and he has a wonderful new book out called SurfSkate, and he puts his images on surfboards and skateboards and SurfSkate clothing and beautiful cashmeres, I must say.
Thank you.
So this, ladies and gentlemen, is Steve Miller. Welcome.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Yeah, how did you get started in all of this? At what age did you know you wanted to be an artist?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think all kids make art,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
And then some just keep making it.
Yeah.
And I had some learning disabilities as a kid, and visual culture, was me and what every kid does. And that became, something that just stayed with me.
So this is like some of your scribbles from when you were a kid?
If I could be as good as I was when I was a kid, I'd be rich and famous.
So you started using medical technology, CAT scans, x-rays, sonograms, all kinds of stuff for your images. What got you interested in that? So unusual.
So I was thinking a lot about what I like in great painting. And I always thought that great art was somehow, you always knew the time that it was made. Mm-hmm. Somehow there's something about a work that's connected to its time, that's about the history of that time. And there was also this dialogue. There's always this dialogue. Painting is dead, and it comes around every few years. And what I was thinking was with these new tools, so you have the portrait, the traditional portrait, and portraiture kind of got marginalized with photography. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't that kind of need to render so much anymore. So what kinds of things would revive these dead genres of painting? So I thought, well, it'd be really interesting to look inside and have a different notion of a
Skeletons.
portrait. And one of the things about, identification, so portraits are about identification. So there's forensic identification, there's dental x-rays, there's DNA. There's all these things that we now use as technology to establish this notion of identity. And there was this also notion in the Renaissance that if it was a really great painting, you could look into the eyes of the person depicted and you could see their soul. So we can literally get inside the body right now. And I thought these tools would be an interesting way to sort of regeneration of this idea that painting can still be kept alive with new tools and a new language system. So you have, perspective in the Renaissance, which was a new form of realism after the flatness of Byzantine art. And then eventually a photography, so then you can be expressionistic and you have different ways to use paint that doesn't have to be literal. And you can go to abstraction. And now the new language, the language of our culture and the language of our time is technology. So it made a lot of sense to make art using the language of our time.
And so how did you become involved with Brookhaven Labs and CERN in Geneva?
Yeah, that's a great long story. The short version is there was a guy that ran Brookhaven Labs called John Marburger. And John ended up being Bush's science advisor. He was the only Democrat in his cabinet. And John had this notion, Brookhaven had a lot of controversy with a spill from one of their reactors.
Oh, I remember that,
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he had been involved in something called Experiments in Art and Technology, called EAT. And he thought, well, maybe in order to clean up the image, I'm maybe putting words, this is my interpretation.
EAT, we should eat it.
Yeah, this is my interpretation, but the idea that that Brookhaven could have a new image by bringing some artists in and introducing them to the technology.
Oh.
So it's like when there's a bad neighborhood, artists come in, they colonize it, they open up a coffee shop, there's a
teach the
boutique.
kids,
yeah,
yeah.
right. So that's one of the things that artists do. We clean up messes. And for me, it was a huge opportunity. I'd had a long talk with Marburger about what they have done. So they fired everybody and they hired him. You know, everyone that was responsible for that film got kicked out of the lab, and they kind of had to start up again. And he thought it would be good. Now they have all these public days you can come into the lab, so they've really, you can go in and look at their collider. They have something called the relativistic heavy ion collider, which is a couple of miles in circumference, where they're colliding protons at the speed of light, temperature of absolute zero.
It's a couple of miles in circumference.
Yeah, exactly.
So diameter,
Exactly.
how big, how...
With diameter, and I think the circumference is a couple of miles.
Yeah,
And
that's huge.
those things have to be really precisely built. And they were trying to do something which was establish what was the nature of matter at Big Bang. And then we're going to put people to sleep if we talk about science.
Yeah,
but
well,
Big Bang was quark gluon plasma. Matter was in a plasma state at Big Bang, going, you know, at the speed of light for about 280 million years.
Right.
And eventually particles, you know, collide and collapse and aggregate. And so what was interesting about being at Brookhaven for me as an artist was it was another level of cutting edge technology, and I felt like I had to know about it. And then, you know, once the next experiment that was being, you know, brought up to speed was something at CERN in Geneva, and that's an international consortium.
They have the biggest collider.
They have the biggest one at the moment. I think China's building a bigger one now, but theirs is 17 miles in circumference.
Oh my goodness.
And what they were trying to do at CERN was, again, collide particles in a frictionless environment at a temperature of absolute zero at the speed of light. And they were looking for another particle called the Higgs boson, which...
And they found it.
They did find it, yeah. So what you have to do is sort through all this data.
That's the smallest so far, right?
It's not the smallest. It's the particle that gives all other particles mass. I'm really going to
Right.
put everyone to sleep.
No, yeah, but I love knowing about the Higgs boson.
Well, there's this something called the Standard Model, and everyone's looking for a unified theory of the universe. So
Yeah.
E equals mc squared, that's one, right? But what they were trying to account for is all the particles. They thought there had to be a particle that put together radiation, the degradation of the beta particle, and Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism. And they thought there had to be another particle that would give all other particles mass. And I could go into a little bit more about it, but I think...
We'll do another
yeah,
show on
yeah,
science.
it would be like bedtime.
I forgot to
Yeah.
mention he's a scientist.
Yeah, it would put everyone to
So,
sleep. So we better get
let's
back
talk
to
about what led
T-shirts and
you to
skateboards.
Brazil. Let's talk about Brazil.
Well, Brazil, I went there in 2005 for a show. And when I got there, I was just blown away, like I was at CERN, another
Yeah.
experience. You know, you just go like, wow, this place is incredible. And nature is this
Abundant.
it's this overwhelming presence.
Yeah.
And I felt during that time that I had to come back, but I didn't feel like I could come back if I couldn't come up with a project. So I was thinking, if the Amazon are the lungs of the planet,
Yeah.
I could X-ray the lungs, the flora and the fauna, and give the planet a metaphorical medical checkup. So,
Before they started burning it down.
well, they were already doing a pretty good job of it then.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Brazil's got almost 60% of the rainforest.
well, there's three major rainforests.
2,100,000 miles in Brazil alone, and then the other countries have like 7%, 14%.
There's Africa, there's Indonesia, and then there's Brazil.
Yeah.
But-
Well, I mean, even in South America, Venezuela has a little
Right.
bit, Peru has a little bit, but Brazil is the main, 60%.
And they're in really bad shape.
Oh, my God.
So I named the project Health of the Planet. I thought that
Love
would be...
the T-shirts, they're great.
Yeah, well, that became... I have the trademark Health of the Planet for
Cool.
fashion, so that's my fashion
Cool.
company, Health of the Planet.
I think the cashmeres are so beautiful.
Oh,
The
thanks.
colors are very, very
Thank
beautiful.
you.
This book, SurfSkate, it's basically photographs and beautiful photographs. And
Thank you.
you took some of them, and your assistant took some of them, and various people. And there's great pictures of surfers and beautiful waves. And and pictures of your studio with a zillion paint cans and paint tubes, and it's a very colorful and beautiful book. And then there's the X-rays, which are basically black and white, of all the piranhas and
Right.
the alligators and the crocodiles, and you put them on skateboards.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's on the surfboard there?
So
that doesn't
this-
have an animal.
Yeah,
on
the
it.
surfboard. So the one surfboard that I brought in here is Amazon river fish. So got fish from the river and X-rayed them. But the idea of doing the surfboards, is we did an X-ray of a live alligator, and it's actually a caiman is what it was. But in the old days, you would kill, right, the animal, stuff it, and put it on your wall.
Yeah.
And
my parents had a stuffed
a
crocodile.
lot of people, that were into that stuff, and there were a lot more animals, and maybe that was a practice that was sustainable at one point, but it's no longer sustainable. And so I thought, let's make a trophy, an eco trophy. We don't kill the alligator, and we put it on the surfboard. And somehow surfboards feel like trophies, the way guys carry their surfboards or put them on the wall. And so I thought I could make somewhat of an eco trophy and make a new
An
idea.
eco statement.
Yeah, of what
too.
of first of all how beautiful this stuff is,
Yeah.
and how fragile it is.
Yeah. Wow. So your first book, Radiographic, is this when you started doing?
Right. So that's like the traditional, fine art, coffee table book that's more strictly about the actual art, the paintings, the sculptures.
Yeah, and it really intersects art and science,
Right.
and it has more paintings in it, I think, than.
So
than
it's
the
like more of
SurfSkate.
a traditional book.
Yeah,
And
it's lovely.
what I
It's a
did try to
lovely
do
book.
is get some good writing, and my idea about good writing, besides somewhat interesting, is that limit to 3 or 4 pages, because that's all anybody's going to read.
Yeah.
And-
The introduction to SurfSkate is very, very nice.
Yeah,
I
we
did
can talk
like
about it
good
in a
story.
second. I got Carl Safina to write, and that's a story in itself, because I didn't know Carl, he didn't know me, and I had to convince him to, submit an essay for this, and it was really down to the wire, but it ended up really beautifully. And the only instructions to anyone that writes for me is whatever you want to write about. So my theory was that there would be a parallel experience that would tie in. And, Carl did an amazing job of doing that.
Telling that story from when he was a kid and his first roller skates.
Oh,
and
that's
stuff.
okay. So that's
That's Michael Tolkien.
Yeah, and SurfSkate.
Yeah.
Michael Tolkien. We went to college together. He's a friend, and he made a movie called Gleaning the Cube, and it was starring Christian Slater, and it was like one of his first.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like one of his
That's
first.
big time.
And it's like kind of a skateboard, the big first Hollywood, skateboard movie. So it's kind of a cult film amongst that crowd. And I thought he would be a great guy to write about skating.
Yeah.
So, he wrote something that's cool too, that's about his
Very
experience, but it sets the mood that I'm looking for.
Yeah, so to you, what are the differences between the two books?
So the first book is 20 years worth of work, kind of starting with, the X-rays. And the origin of the book was the woman that owns the company. Her name is Marta Hallett, and she owns Glitterati. She saw my work in a gallery and said, "Why don't you have a book?" And she wanted to really work on mostly the flowers. And I, as conversations got going, I got her to do the X-rays, painting, sculptures, and even including the first surfboards and skateboards. So, but it's more like just the art. And I would say SurfSkate is more about extending beyond the confines of a book or a gallery. But traditionally art's in a space that we're familiar with, and it's 4 white walls.
Right.
And I love the idea of getting the art out in the world in all these different ways. So the second book, SurfSkate, is more like the energy behind Radiographic, like the energy that goes into making this work, we kind of documented in this book. So it's lifestyle, it's studio practice, it's how the stuff is made, it's behind the scenes.
Oh, that big printer. There's a picture of you with like a really big printer.
Right.
Very cool.
So that's a silkscreen press that's in my studio. So it's
Is
sort
it in
of
your studio here or in New York?
out here in Sagaponic. But it kind of shows like how things are made, what a studio practice is about, and the the ways that I'm interested in getting art into many locations.
And how did you evolve into doing a line of clothing, and what does that entail? Do you have to go into 7th Avenue?
No, I mean, all
You're
of
not a
these things are like,
Garmento?
how they get the book. A woman came into a gallery and called me up and said, why don't you have a book?
A guy walked into a bar.
So in this one, I had been doing the x-rays in a town in the Amazon called Belém, B-E-L-E-M. I think it means Bethlehem in Portuguese. And it's the mouth of the Amazon, and that's where the animals were. And so a friend of mine, Nessia Pope, said, look, you have to donate a work to the Brazil benefit that she was part of getting the art for. So I donated something, and you get to go to the event. So I started talking to this guy, and his name is Oscar, and he had just been to Belém, and I had just been to Belém, and I'm thinking he's an artist. So like, what are you doing there and stuff? He says, I'm looking at fabrics and things like that, and I knew his company really well. His company is called Osklin, and he's the guy that founded it. He's a brilliant guy, really into the environment and environmentally safe practices, sustainable practices. And I said to him at the event, I said, I have a great idea for you, and I know you brand really well and I've been buying it, but I can't tell you the idea. And because I had done an idea for another company.
And off they went with it.
Yeah, and they did the idea.
Happened to me many times.
Yeah, and I ended up, it was a French company, I ended up suing them, but I lost. And so I wanted to make sure I had my trademark status and stuff in place before I pitched the idea. Anyway, he was just bugging me for the idea. I threw out all the trademark stuff, and I told him exactly what I wanted to do, which was...
Did you at least get an NDA? Not that
nothing.
It doesn't even hold up anyway.
Well, I had a show coming up in Rio, and he could then go see the show. I mean, it's sort of like, you can put all these things in place, but it felt like the energy and the momentum was in the moment, so I went with it. Once again, once in France it was stupid, but here it was a good idea. And, eventually we decided to put the images on his clothing. So I did a clothing line for Osklin, a surf line. It was really successful and fun to do. And I started thinking about, and then I got asked by another company called Art Multiples to make some clothing for them. Then I got asked by this cashmere company. And so now I'm trying to aggregate it all in one place under my trademark, which is Health of the Planet. Yeah.
And so when did you decide to put it on skateboards and surfboards?
I thought about the surfboard thing like right away when I came back, because the coastline of Brazil is enormous, and they're really into surfing. They're really into water sports. And I had done a surf line of clothing for Osklin, the company in Rio. So it seemed really natural. Also, the alligator's the shape of a surfboard. So the surfboard I made was an alligator, and then once you start putting images on, it's like, oh my God, there's so much I can do.
So when you did the x-ray of the alligator, it was a dead alligator?
No, absolutely alive.
Did you give it a lot of Xanax?
No animals were hurt. I worked with a zoo,
Yeah.
and I worked with the vet, who was the head guy
Did
in
he
charge.
give the alligator a lot of Xanax?
Yeah, he did. So we sedated, I didn't, he sedated a juvenile, and he said that they could
Starting a kid on drugs.
Yeah, they said, I know, it's, an animal's a terrible thing to waste. So they mildly sedated them. It was alive. I mean, it was moving and stuff. But we got it to calm down, and there was just like a thin piece of twine around its mouth, and we just fed it through the x-ray machine in sections. And then I put it together in Photoshop, all the different sections. So that's how we got the x-ray. But the animal went back to wherever the animal came from. So I was there for a week or so, and every night they would bring in incredible stuff.
Wow. What about the piranhas?
So the piranhas, so it's really hot there. You have to get up like at 4 in the morning, seriously, and go to the fish market. So we would get a lot of the fish, like the fish that's on the surfboard that's here in the market every morning. But they didn't have piranhas. I wanted piranhas for a lot of reasons, just for the symbolic value.
Yeah.
Piranhas also, they keep the ecosystem in balance. They eat all the garbage in the river. They actually make the river cleaner and better so the other species can survive. And piranha has so much metaphorical, I won't even go there. There's different professions where, piranha is used as a derogatory word, but I just love the aggressiveness of
Yeah.
the myth around the piranha, and that seemed very much what we are as a species in terms of the environment. Like
True.
we're just like boom, boom, boom,
Yeah, chewing
eating
it
through
up.
it, and I thought the piranha was the metaphor for that. But I actually had to order the piranhas because you can't buy them in the fish market because there's
Nobody eats them.
well, there's not
no
there's
flesh
not a
on
lot
them,
of
is
meat.
there?
Yeah, there's not a lot
No.
of. They eat them
They're
in the
thin.
Amazon because if that's what they catch, and it's
Yeah.
and there's and there's some food there. You'll eat the piranha. What little food there is. I actually did eat piranha while I was there to see what it tastes like.
Yeah, what do they taste like?
It was super fried.
Oh,
It
tasted like oil.
Yeah, so I don't know if I really got the flavor. And there's about
Yeah.
that much meat in the piranha. It's all bone. There's a little bit of flesh behind the cheek, and
Yeah.
that's it. But
That's it.
the piranha was a great metaphor for what's going on.
Definitely.
So that's kind of why I liked it, and I love the idea that they actually, there's the myth of the piranha, and then there's the actual what they really do, which is.
Clean up the bottom,
Yeah.
clean up the waters.
Yeah, which is also a
Yeah.
role that we have to stop being the mythical piranha and become the actual organic living piranha, which is clean it up.
Clean it up. This burning of the rainforest is the lungs of the earth are now belching out because when they burn it, it's carbon and
they
greenhouse
release
gases.
massive amounts of carbon, and they also, it's a vicious cycle that can't be repaired. They, as you start
can't.
drying out the earth.
All the animals that live there, and the herbs.
Yeah,
and
no, it's a
all
horror show. It's a horror
show.
show.
And has it slowed down at all in the last couple of weeks since it hit the news?
I can't tell you that, but a couple of years ago I gave a lecture at the National Academy of Sciences where I had a solo show and I was required to give a talk. So I took all the stats. This was 2 years ago, OSHA and NASA. So I took U.S. government statistics, and at that time, the forest had already collapsed. So the heat of the jungle now is so hot that it's
my.
hotter than the temperature that the plants can actually process the CO2. So they're dying and creating dry rot and collapsing.
Oh man.
So it's going to be really, really the best carbon sink that they've figured out so far to grab the CO2 is a tree. So
Yeah.
planting massive amounts of trees is one solution, but the Amazon is so vast that what you've ruined, it's a very complex ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's not
sure.
just the trees, it's the moisture in the ground, the plants that grow on the ground, and it's a cycle.
And
What
the
happens?
insects and
It
the-
rains every day in Baylam between 4 and 6. It's so hot. It's the hottest place I've ever been, and all that moisture gets sucked up and evaporates, and then there's so much in the sky that it comes down and rains every day, torrential rain. But that's the cycle. Now, when
Now,
you burn the
doesn't-
forest, you've ended that cycle. And the water now doesn't get reabsorbed by the plants that are there. There's not enough stuff in the ground to reabsorb that water, so that water
Just
runs off. Yeah,
Runs off and brings the carbon all over the place.
right.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. Well, climate change
Let's go
is-
to a different subject. How are you feeling about social media?
I think social media can be real. It's love it or hate it. For me, I know some people that are, it's another obsessive compulsive drug. I think for an artist though, it's slightly different because we communicate
Really
with
good
images.
for promotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and promotion, communication. If you make visual images, eyeballs have to connect with it. And I think what's interesting now about visual images, which is why I did SurfSkate, there's now all these different ways that you can connect with eyeballs. It doesn't have to be, it's great if it's in a museum or a gallery, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So you can get those images out there in 100 different ways. And in my case, I am interested in putting on clothing and skate decks and surfboards, but also social media is fantastic because what you can do is and what's interesting about social media is you get data back, which is what I learned at CERN. I thought it was about images and it's charts of data. It's about collisions. So when you put something out on social media, you can actually measure the results if that's interesting to you. It's not a requirement. But I think for artists, it's really important to do whatever you can to get eyeballs onto your work. And social media is free, and it's ubiquitous. So
far.
Yeah, to me it's
really
important.
changed for me after Trump was elected. I became quite tech adverse, I have to say.
Well, I mean, you know, he's a total pig, you know, for starters. And you know, the way he uses... Yeah, I mean, the way he's using social media is clever, and he understands
manipulative.
Yeah. You know, he understands that it's a great way...
Distraction.
So it used to be that messages, like traditional messages for an artist, maybe it was confined to the art gallery at Art Magazine, right? And for a politician, you know, you gave a press conference and then it was filtered through whatever the press is. What Twitter did was, and Twitter, you know, caused revolutions in the Ukraine, all sorts of places. So there's this good side of it, you know, and there's this dangerous side of it. The dangerous side of it is Donald Trump, you know, spreading lies and bypassing a filtering system that was actually corrective and at least, you know, challenged whatever he says. With Twitter, he can say whatever he wants and get it out there, and the audience that wants to receive it can receive it.
Yeah, and forward it.
And bypass bypass traditional filtering systems.
Well, we are running out of time, but you teach it's visual arts, and
I teach since 2002. I've
all
been
kinds
teaching.
of stuff. I have so many more questions to ask you, but we ran out of time. You're just too interesting. You must come back.
All right, I'm ready.
Thank you
Tell me when, Judy.
for visiting us at the Ladies' Room. And remember, ladies, give yourself lots of room for love, room for fun, room to grow, and room to glow. And definitely pick up SurfSkate. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. And it is a metaphor for what is going on in the rainforest and such.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Breathe in. Breathe in. Couldn't stop it. Couldn't stop